Whenever you are, Chair, whenever you're ready.
Okay. It's not 6 o'clock yet, but we can start. All right, members. Welcome to the Children and Young People Scrutiny Board. For tonight's meeting, let's do the agenda items. Number 1. Substitutes nominated for this meeting.
None received, Chair.
Members' interest. Members, you know the score. Members of the board will be asked to say if there are any items on the agenda which they have disclosable, pecuniary or other interest, which would put, etc. Declare them at the time or now. No? Admission of the public. We are live on YouTube, and I'd just like to put a shout out to Ken, Lauren's granddad, who I understand watches these programmes. We're happy to have you. There must be nothing on television, is all I can say. Reruns of Friends, actually. Minutes of the meeting, 13th of January. Comments, members? There were none. I would just like to say that I thought they were a very diplomatic reflection of the meeting.
Councillor Collins would like to come in.
Oh, Councillor Collins, sorry. Anne.
Sorry, it's just that somewhere in those minutes, and I haven't got the full set. It says that, you know, we're looking at something that Councillor Hutchinson was proposing, a working group that needn't meet urgently. And it says that I volunteered, but I didn't actually, because I won't be a councillor then. If you remember, it was a kind of longer term issue, wasn't it? That
yeah, we said we were going to do it in the new municipal year, didn't we?
Yeah.
The Healthy Futures.
Healthy Futures, yeah, I can't remember.
I couldn't remember the name of it, but I don't think I volunteered. But if I did, I won't be able to be on that group if it's not going to start until after May. So you'll need another member, Chair.
Okay. All right.
Chair, I just believe it was an acknowledgement of Councillor Collins' proposal to join that group.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll sort that out, as I say, in a new municipal year. So straight on to item 5, COVID briefings. Whoa. My screen has gone completely blank. But can anybody hear me?
Yeah, we can still hear you.
we can hear you.
All righty. So I guess that's you, Julie.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rostrick. Good evening, members and members of Children's Scrutiny. We've got 2 items this evening for you of an update on COVID. The first is on children's social care, and you have been sent a briefing note for you to read in preparation for this item that covers the recent trends, particularly in relation to what we call the front door, the multi-agency screening team and the children's assessment team, what's coming in there. And you had a particular interest in domestic violence, so the figures are in there too. We appreciate it's quite a technical report. So we're going to start this evening. Zell will introduce himself next, and Zell's just going to give you a bit more meat on the bones, if you like, or a bit more flavour of the work that's been undertaken and some of the improvement work around the front door as well. So I'm just going to hand over to Zell to start, Councillor Raystrick, to give you a bit more on that briefing note.
Yeah, that's fine. Welcome, Zell. I can't see you, but it doesn't matter. I thought the report was very interesting. I'm not sure I understood it as well as I would have liked to, and I think it's a good idea for you to give us a bit of background, if that's all right with you.
We can't hear you, Zell. I don't think you're on mute, but...
I can't hear him. Can anybody else hear him?
No? Do you want me to start doing the intro for you, Zell, and then see whether you can get your... Yeah, Zell's just going off. Hang on a sec. I'll just get...
We'll wait.
That's okay.
I'm just waiting for Ken's feedback to Lauren as to, on this.
You on YouTube?
Okay. Yeah, you've got quite a heavy data. Obviously, it's the data report, and when people first make contact with us, it's called a contact, and if we decide actually it is something for children's services, it becomes a referral. But this is Zell's report to you. Hopefully, he'll get his speaker back shortly. But the first thing Zell wanted to let you know was about the improvements that we've made. If you remember when we were inspected in 2018, this was an area that required improvement. So a lot of work has been done. I don't want to go through it all in detail, but just give you a flavour of some of the things that have been done with the front door in relation to the process, but also with the staff. So lots of work's been done around, the systems, the processes of the forms and the procedures, just making sure there's some really crisp, clear decision making by the managers at the front door. There are a lot of practice managers and team managers within the front door service, and they all report to Zell as the service manager. So it's really important that staff in that front door know what to do when it comes in, how tight the timescales are. And you'll see from the report that our timeliness is actually very good in dealing with the work in a timely and effective manner. So I'm just going to take you through the process. I think a lot of you know that, and I know some of you visited the front door, particularly on your regulation visits. But if anybody's worried about a child in Calderdale, this is where they call. They pick up the phone generally and they ring through and they speak to one of the social work staff, and we gather a lot of information from them. But we also speak to the family, and we also speak to everybody who's involved with that family to get a really good view of what's going on. What are the strengths in this family, but what are the areas that they need some help with. And we've worked really hard to make sure that that team is really well staffed and they feel they can carry out their work. And we've had it described as creating a culture where social work can actually flourish, which is lovely to hear. They do feel safe. They've got a lot of managers around within that service. So during the day, it's the staff at Princess Buildings. During the evening, we have an emergency duty team who pick up as soon as 5 o'clock, as soon as it hits 5 o'clock, all through the evening, 24/7. There is somebody available to talk to if you're worried about a child. And they also cover all the weekends, which I'm sure you know. We do have a dedicated team for child exploitation. This used to be just around sexual exploitation, if you remember the hub, the child exploitation hub, but it's now broader than that and also looks at any forms of exploitation. So we're talking about criminal exploitation, etc. So we do have a domestic hub that's multi-agency, that is meeting virtually, but also meets every day. That's to make sure we're all sharing information and an action plan comes out from that meeting about how to deal with the families. I just wanted to touch here on early help, because what you'll see in the figures is that there has been a reduction in the work that's coming through to the social care teams. And this is because we've created an early help hub within the front door. So if you're a family that's coming forward for some help and you don't meet the social care criteria, we've got a multi-agency response. So we've got police officers, we've got staff from the family intervention team, the children's centre staff, we've got youth workers, some of the youth offending team, who will pick up those families and work with them at a much earlier level. So in December, there were 205 families that were being worked with, in addition to the figures you can see on children's social care. Zell's covered a bit in his report. I'm going to come on to the data, but a little bit about how do we in the service assure ourselves that things are safe. And we do have a lot of performance reporting, as you can imagine, around this area. We get weekly reports on all the data that comes in, particularly around demand, what's happening over that previous week. So we get demand graphs, how many referrals that we've had. We also get regular performance reports around the timeliness, and we carry out audits in respect of the quality of the work. And we also compare ourselves to Yorkshire and Humber. We get data that we share across the 15 local authorities every quarter, so we can see in more real time how we're doing compared to others. So just moving on to some of the data, the performance data, as you'll see, is telling us that a lot of the work is done in a timely way. When you look at Section 47 inquiries, Section 47 is a child protection investigation. And when you look at the Section 47 inquiries, you'll see that the 100% of those are dealt with within 5 days. We do have 15 days to carry out that work. But we're doing them much more quickly and much more effectively than that. And you'll see in our single assessment, if a family require an assessment, we're doing 99%, 99.6 of those in 45 days. And this is an area that's always under focus in any inspection, is have you got enough staff to deal with the work quickly? Are families waiting? Are cases being stacked? And as you can see in the front door, that is just not happening. We did in January 2020 had a front door health check. This is something we're doing in the region where we go in and look at each other's front door. And before COVID, as this was, we actually had it with colleagues from Barnsley and Rotherham who were in Princess buildings. And their view, these were experts from front doors across the region. They said they thought the front door service was good and outstanding in some parts, but striving to do even better all the time. Just in terms of timeliness, as I said, is good, but we look at the quality. Zell and his managers do a lot of regular monthly audit of the massed cases. So they're looking at the decision making, people making the right decisions around cases. And what the audits are telling us is, yes, in the majority, those are being dealt with appropriately. We also do thematic audits around particular areas, so criminal exploitation or any themes and areas that come up. Zell wanted just to finish by saying he's just done a front door health check himself. It's been done remotely and he's just had a look at Barnsley, and Rachel Brady, our team manager's just finished this week in North Yorkshire. So we're reciprocating what we've had. And Zell wanted to finish by saying he was quite proud to be part of that journey in Calderdale and to manage the front door services. We wanted to be able to give you the opportunity, because it is a technical report, to ask and to answer any questions as well, Councillor Raystrick and members of Scrutiny.
Hello,
Anything
can you
you'd
hear
like to
me?
ask? Oh, brilliant, Zell. You're back just in time. So you can answer all the questions.
I had actually to call in via my phone, Julie, so my apologies to everyone. I couldn't hear everything that you have said, so I don't know where you are, Julie, at the moment.
I've just taken people through your introduction.
Okay.
Zell. Yeah, so I've finished it, and the members have already said it's quite a detailed data report. So I think they've got a number of questions. So we'll move on to questions, Zell, and you can help me answer them. That'll be great.
Thank you, Julie, and my apologies, everyone.
Don't worry.
Don't worry about it, Zell. Members, any questions? There's nobody in the chat. I'm going to ask the first question. I look around. Welcome, Zell. I heard you say that before. So it took some reading this report. I'm still not sure I've got the overview right in my head. We look at the source of contacts and the outcomes of contacts, and then we look at the referring agencies. It's the police or the police domestic abuse hub. Are we happy with the spread of referrals? When we first started early intervention, increasing the numbers of referrals, we were talking about raising everybody's awareness. Are we happy with the spread? Are we happy that only 3% are coming from schools, or is the spread right? Not just is the number right, but is the spread right? Are we happy that we're catching everybody we should do?
Yeah,
well,
I think go on, Zell.
Sorry, yeah, Julie. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll let you speak, Julie.
No, I was just going to say to the members, it'd be good to look at table 1 for this, the sources of the contacts that are coming in. You answer, Zell. Yeah.
Usually, the most referrals that we would receive would actually come for the police and also the schools. In respect of referrals, if I might just have a look at the actual table 1. As you can see, actually 24.25% of referrals are coming from the police, and altogether from primary school and secondary school, we've got around, that would be 11.5 to 12% nearly. We are talking, that would be 2 of our biggest partner agencies that would be making referrals. About being happy, I'm not 100% sure, but what we are doing actually is we do maintain regular discussions with schools and have actually liaised with schools throughout the COVID pandemic. And obviously, the school would inform us if there are vulnerable children or young people on their own that are not attending school and not being seen by school. So what we used to do initially is actually we would send a social worker to conduct a visit if the school cannot have any contact with each child or children. And actually, at that point, we wouldn't necessarily know as to whether or not there are any safeguarding concerns. So what we are doing now is actually early help services are also picking up contacts from school during the lockdown and children that they are struggling to contact. And they will actually go out and see the children. I don't know how much information Julie has shared about early help pathway and what we have done actually in respect of the early help, so I can expand on it or just share a little bit of information that I already have on myself.
Expand on it, Zell.
Yeah, thank you. What we have realized actually that we need a strong early help offer. Therefore, we have introduced the early help pathway. And just to clarify, the early help hub will receive referrals directly from MAST because all contacts would be actually coming through to MAST. And if the cases are not deemed that there is a role for children's services care, and where the needs are identified and can be met through an early help offer, then we will actually involve early help offer. Just to reassure you that these referrals are already screened by MAST prior to being referred to early help hub to ensure that there are no safeguarding concerns. And I don't know if Julie has shared information about who is actually at this hub. It is a multi-agency decision-making forum with representatives from MAST, from early intervention, police, your justice service, youth services, family intervention team, and early help. And also there has been a recent expansion, actually, which included liaison and diversion team. What has happened, we have noticed, actually, over a period from July to December 2020, the number of cases held by the early help has increased by 48 children. And we are expecting that this number will continue to increase over the time. And this is what actually we want to happen. Currently, our data is telling us that 27.1% of our assessments are concluded within the outcome of no further actions or cases are being closed following completion of the assessment. And what we need to ask actually as to whether conducting a single assessment and having social work involved with the family was actually the best approach in the first place. We know that most referrals, as you ask, has come from the police and schools, and we are now working with them actually to ensure actually that the families get the right help at the right time, and actually always looking as to whether there is a need for a children's social care. We know that a lot of our families don't want to have social workers involved with them, and they would respond a lot better actually by our partner agencies or any other agencies like voluntary agencies, community agencies, or any universal services. And what we are now trying to do is actually check as to whether those services are the best place at times to respond to the family's needs. What I'm assuming is happening, given that the children are not being seen at school as regularly as they have been previously, that there might be some children that we are missing, but not if we are informed actually that there is a child who is not attending school and is not being seen by the school staff.
I was comprehensive. I'm not sure I answered the question. Are we happy with the spread? Are we happy that the organisations we want to refer are referring? That's really what I'm asking. Is it right? I'm not saying it's wrong. And I'm not saying it's wrong that what we've got here. I would say what I want to know is that it's right.
I cannot. I'm not able to answer as to whether or not I'm happy. I would only be happy if I can ensure 100% that all children in Calderdale are safeguarded at all times, whether or not it is police or school or anyone else who refer.
Right, so,
In respect of it, yeah.
all right, so we talked to other. We talked to other. You're talking to other councils, Barnsley, Rochdale, etc., etc. What do their numbers look like for the referrals? Are they the same as ours?
I don't have that information on me. What I can do is actually try and gather that information, because what we have seen, it seems to be nationally, the number of domestic abuse incidents have increased. And obviously, each local authority has responded differently in respect of school children. And at the moment, we have maintained regular contact with schools. We have also maintained training with schools, and we've got a liaison with schools through Steve Barnes. And actually, any issues, any referrals or case discussions are still taking place. So in respect of us communicating with schools, I'm more than happy with that, because this is what we have continued to do so throughout the pandemic. In respect of the numbers, they are still our second biggest referring agencies, primary and secondary schools together, following the referrals from the police.
Can I just come in, Chair, just about the position of schools and the police as well, just to add a few things. Every school has a designated lead for child protection, and most of our schools have a system called the Child Protection Online Monitoring System that many of you will know about, I'm sure, if you're governors or you work in schools. So the schools are keeping an incredible amount of, accurate detail and of any concerns or anything that's happening in relation to a child's behaviour or any worries they've got that they're able to share with us. The training, as Elle said, happens for teaching school staff, but within each of the 6 clusters in primary, there's a regular meeting with Rob Murray and with Leslie Bowyer as well, to really make sure, some of the, the national learning, the strategic messages around safeguarding, but picking up those issues that may be happening on the ground as well and making sure that they're fed back up. When you look at how many contacts go through to be an appropriate referral and it goes to children's social care, the percentage from schools is extremely high. I think it might be around 99 or 100, near 100% from primary. So if somebody contacts us from a primary and they're worried, they know the stuff. They know that child needs to be referred in. They know it's going to meet the social care threshold criteria. They're also using the early intervention panels if they need to, if it's at a lower level. But I would say our schools are very, very much tuned in to what's going on for their children and families. And they know when it's reached that point where it may need a social worker. I think the police referrals into the front door have increased massively over probably the last 10 years. Really around to domestic violence and us understanding more the damage that there is, that children suffer when they're in a household where parents are, where there's arguments, where there's domestic violence, where parents are hitting each other is huge. So we've got more children now on a child protection plan for emotional abuse that's due to the domestic violence they're experiencing. And the police have recently moved on to a handheld device. When they're in the house, they can actually send a referral immediately through. They don't have to go back to the office and wait to write it up, etc. They can send a safeguarding adult referral, children referral through immediately. So I think that's why you can see quite a lot of volume from the police. We do have to filter it out. We do have to make sure that that it is appropriate, and that happens in MAST. It happens in the DV hub too, but it looks heavy on the police side. I would agree with you on that. But I think that's for good reason. I think because they're picking things up in the community and they're sending it through straight away to the front door. We do have a police officer in the front door as well. I'm
not sort of arguing that it's heavy on the police side. I would expect that to be the case. My point really was, is the spread right? But
yeah.
Now that I think you're right about the last 10 years, obviously the police now, it's mandatory procedure that when there's a child involved in a domestic abuse incident, it's automatic referral, isn't it? I mean, that's what they're taught.
Yes.
That's what the policemen were capable of told us. Anyway. Okay, we'll move on. Amanda.
Thank you, Chair.
No
And
problem.
thank you, Zell, for a really good report. It was really interesting. Can I just refer back to what Julie was saying about systems and processes have changed at the front door? Can you just give us an idea of how they've changed and what you've done to, I think I'll use your words, to crisp up the process? Yeah, just interested to know how what you've done. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, thank you, Amanda. In respect of the systems that we have introduced in place following the Ofsted ILACS inspection, the mass have become actually the first port of call for all referrals to children's services. What we have also done is ensure that all our systems are updated and processes, and this includes for example, all our forms to start with, including contact forms, templates for completion of strategy meetings and discussions, templates for Section 47s have been updated. Also, what we have done is provided guidance to practice managers how to conduct strategy meetings. Within the strategy meetings and discussions, we have actually developed a safety plan, because what this local authority was good previously is recognizing the risk actually posed to the child. However, in between a strategy discussion and the initial conference, there is 15 working days. And that child would not necessarily be seen or supported properly by any agencies. What is happening now, there is a safety plan developed at the point of the strategy discussion. The social worker and other partner agencies start working with the families immediately. During our front door health check, I don't know if Julie has mentioned it, so again, Julie, my apologies actually. We have been actually asked to look at actually our early help provision. So what we are also doing is actually now ensuring that actually we through our early help provision actually we start working with families immediately. On top of that, there is suggestion that our assessments, although very good and our timeliness have been really, really good, is actually that they have found some of those assessments that haven't been consistently good. So what we have done is provided guidance for those assessments. Actually, any decisions that are being made in respect of the strategy discussions are now made to by our team managers rather than the practice managers. What we have also realized is actually that demand in the front door in respect of contact has increased, and we have now agreed that we would employ extra 2 social workers in order to respond to those demands. Our decision making has become more confident actually, and what we are finding through our audits, our observation, is actually that our decision in the front door services is actually sound, and all the meetings and processes have been streamlined actually in order to ensure that there is no duplication of work. For example, domestic abuse who would transfer immediately into MARAC meeting if there are serious concerns in respect of the child's welfare, and so on. Quite few.
Thanks for that, Zell. Can I just come back with what you were saying about the early help? Is that okay, Chair? I just wanted to ask about the early help hub. I was involved in the domestic violence review a couple of years ago, and more children are now on a child protection plan, obviously because of domestic abuse. There was a really good piece of work that was done on a perpetrator programme that looked at, okay, not everybody went through with this perpetrator programme, but there was a number of families that were really supported during that. Can I just ask if that perpetrator programme is going to be in place in the future, or if you've got anything running like that now.
We have discussed it today, so Julie might be a better person actually to respond to that, because I thought so there is some funding actually being agreed for perpetrators.
Yeah, I know Helen was involved in this and a few others as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, just to update you all, I chaired the Domestic Abuse Board, the Partnership Board for Calderdale this afternoon. And we've been allocated a sum of money from the government in relation to the new domestic violence bill that's going through. It's £455,000 to look at, well, firstly, to undertake a needs assessment and looking at the services we've already got on the ground. And we did talk, Councillor Parsons-Hulse, in the meeting about perpetrator programmes. We had some figures in the performance report about the high risk perpetrators that have got a programme in place. We think the funding for that has actually stopped. We've had very small numbers through that, but we do have another programme running for first time offenders who come to notice of the police, are contacted by some early intervention help for men who've perpetrated it for the first time. We've also got support there for medium, but we think the long term the funding for the high risk work has actually run out. And what we've said is, Angela Everson was on the call from the Women's Centre and said there's quite a national kind of lobby to look at perpetrator programmes, to look at the funding that's coming down. The funding is for anything that we need, whether it's direct work with children, the work with victims, the work with offenders. So it's right across the piece, looking at safe accommodation. So we will identify what we need across the partnership. And I think this will follow on quite nicely from the scrutiny review that was done around domestic abuse, which did identify some gaps that with this new funding we'll be able to look at. But perpetrator programmes are there at the minute for the low and medium, but we think they've stopped for the high. But we've only got a couple of people on doing high at the moment, or done high in the last quarter.
I'd be really interested to see how that unfolds. And if you could bring that to this meeting, if that's something we can jot down, Chair, just a review of perpetrator programs. Because if we can nip it in the bud, because what we're seeing is a lot of persistent offending, if we can nip that in the bud, obviously that affects our figures further down the line, and obviously the children that end up in residential care. Yeah, that'd be really interesting to see that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Councillor Rivron was leading that work, weren't you, Councillor Rivron, for another scrutiny?
Yeah, I was going to come in, but I'll take my turn. I think there are other people before me.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you. £450,000. That's a lot of money, Julie. Sarah.
Yeah, thank you.
I know Julie's answered one of your questions in chat, but I don't really like people doing that, if you don't mind me saying.
I'm sorry about that. I should it was so basically it was just about the picture of, obviously schools are open, we know that schools aren't closed, and obviously some of the young people that are attending schools are most vulnerable, some young people, but just how's it just and I know that this has sort of been answered a bit, but just but are we supporting schools in order to help them, carry on picking up and making referrals? I totally understand, Julie, that our schools are really good at picking this up, and how are we assisting them in the sort of COVID landscape, I suppose?
I'll ask Leslie to come in.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Courtney. Yes, there's, as Zal touched on earlier, there's been extensive work since March last year to support schools in identifying where there may be need for additional referrals, but also to support those children where there are already concerns. So right from the beginning, we did some really extensive work starting in the early years, working with our safeguarding partnership to identify any children who weren't being seen regularly and make sure that they were having regular welfare checks, which included remote contact, but also visits to the home in a COVID safe way. And those have continued where children haven't been in school. We also provide support through our school safeguarding officer, Steve Barnes, who Al mentioned earlier. And Steve works really closely with our schools and we've sent out some information gathering pro formas recently to make sure that we understand every child who's not in school who may be vulnerable. So that includes children where there's a social worker involved, and our social workers work really closely with the schools and with families to safeguard them, but also to look at wider vulnerabilities and make sure that all our services are aware where those children aren't in face-to-face contact regularly with schools, just what's in place to make sure that those safeguarding arrangements are really robust. I'd say that's one of the areas where we've worked really well with schools and all services involved to make sure that those vulnerable children are being seen, physically seen by people, and that schools have got the support then to make the referrals in a timely way and have access to any further support that they need.
All right, thank you. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a bit of a comment and then a sort of question at the second part. I think going back to your point, I think it's very difficult, and probably Dr. Vickers is more aware of this than anyone here, but when you're producing a data-driven report, it's very difficult what to put in and what to put out. My only comments would be that when you put figures which are just a snapshot, which is what they are in those first few tables, it's very difficult to get a comparison of where things are, both in relation to time and in relation to other authorities. And I think we should always make a consideration when we're producing such absolute figures that we do have a comparison with where we were and against other authorities at the same, or potentially against other authorities at the same time, because on their own they can be almost meaningless in that thing. But that's just a point for future reference. My key question is relating actually to Table 7. And in Table 7, it very much highlights that the worst periods of time in relation to the number of children in the households against the number of cases was May, June, and then August and September. Primarily 3 of those 4 months were when schools were back in full operation. So can I ask what action and or resources are being thought about for when schools go back in March to prevent such a spike at that period of time?
Shall I come in?
Just add to that before you start, Leslie. Just add to that. Are we expecting a spike?
I wouldn't necessarily say that, Chair, but that's if you look at the data from last year, those spikes were when schools went back to full operational. So I'm just thinking, if that trend was last year and that trend continues, are we preparing ourselves for it? Is more the question. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Leslie, do you want to come in first, and then I'll come on to Zell myself? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the issues there, Councillor Barnes, is that where we saw some of the spikes there, it's where children were making disclosures within schools when they were back in. So that I think we learnt a lot through that period of making sure that children have got access to be able to do that. It's not always easy when if they're at home and they don't have that direct contact with a trusted member of staff within school, when there perhaps isn't when there aren't other people around in the home that may overhear them. So schools are very mindful of that and have, for example, many schools have got a button on their website that a student can click on that and report something confidentially through there. So I think some of the spike is to do with how effective arrangements are in school for children to make disclosures when they're with those trusted adults. So potentially, yes, there could be a further spike as we see wider opening of schools coming back this time as well.
Oh, so we are expecting a spike?
Yes, we will see an increase in contacts and referrals. We did see, Councillor Courtney was asking earlier on, did we see a reduction when there were less children in education, which we did. And then when children came back, as Leslie said, and are either disclosing themselves or school teachers are speaking to pupils about what's happening while they've been at home, we have seen an increase. And I think Councillor Barnes's question is around, are we ready for that increase? Yes, we are. We did put an extra whole team in CAT after the 2018 inspection, but we've also put a significant number of new workers as well within MAST, and Zal mentioned those earlier on. because we know the work is ebbing and flowing quite significantly. And we also put additional capacity in emergency duty team as well during the lockdowns. We know we needed another person on at night, you know, instead of when we've had 2 people on there. Under the Domestic Abuse Board, I have been checking out in terms of the capacity right across the partnership about how are people operating during COVID and then when the lockdowns have lifted. Pretty much assured really by, you know, the police are working as business as usual, talked about the handheld devices, you know, the response to domestic violence, going out into the community, seeing, you know, responding to incidents as they would do normally. More resources within Zell's service area, and the Women's Centre have been very successful in drawing down additional money, not from the council, just by, you know, being part of the voluntary and community sector, being able to bid in for money, have significantly increased their resource for the Staying Safe service. We also have a lot of support around women who are wanting to flee with our own refuge, and we've got capacity there. And we've also done a safety check, you know, a kind of a check with accident and emergency as well, to see what's happening if women are turning up at A&E, you know, particularly in that COVID secure environment. You know, are they able to disclose and get the right services that they need there as well too. So, you know, by and large, I would say the DV services are running pretty much full as they can do. And I think we've got extra capacity there in the front door and also within Zell's area.
Happy, Mike?
Sorry, my apologies.
Sorry, Women's Centre as well. Sorry.
If I may add, actually, we have actually liaised with school throughout the COVID pandemic, and they would inform us if there are any children or young people that are on their roll and are not attending school or not being seen by staff, or if they have any concerns. The training actually with school staff has continued virtually throughout this period. We've got school effectiveness officers and designated safeguarding leads who are actually trained in safeguarding. And there is something called the NET, which is in place to identify children with poor attendance who might have dropped out of sight of the education service. As I mentioned before, we are regularly liaising with Steve Barnes, who is school safeguarding advisor, and our team manager from MAST, Rachel Brady, is attending cluster meetings with the heads of services across Calderdale.
Thank you, Zell. Happy, Mike? Okay. David, welcome. You'll have to unmute yourself, David.
Just looking at the response rate, is it normal to be expected that the primary sector are almost double the response to secondary education?
The younger children are more vulnerable than the older ones, and that might be one of the main reasons as to why we are receiving more concerns and more actually referrals from primary schools than we do from secondary schools.
So it's not a concern about, you know, staff responding, making.
I have been in these local authorities for nearly 2 years now, and only one case was brought to my attention actually that I need to assist with between school and MAST. I think that the relationship between schools and the MAST is absolutely brilliant, as it is with all our partner agencies. And what we are also looking at the moment, and we have done for a number of months now, is actually as to whether or not we can have an educational representative within the MAST who would be able to actually develop those relationships even further, but also to provide us with the information about the child's school attendance, about their achievements, if there are any worries from school, even during the time when there are school holidays, bank holidays, or summer holidays, or anything like that, really. So I have not come across any major issues, and I think that the relationship between the school and Calderdale Children and People Services have been absolutely brilliant.
Well, thank you. That's great to hear. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Helen.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of slightly different points. One is perhaps I would like to come back a little bit on that point that David just raised around secondary schools, because I think there is certainly all work I've done on around safeguarding said that teenagers could be very vulnerable, but in a different way, around, for example, like sexual exploitation, around, for example, self-harming. So I think whilst the issues are different, you know, I would still think it's a bit of a concern that not getting those referrals to secondary schools. I think also in the person what we did, I think the issue around an education representative and the mask was an issue that was raised there. Not liaison was good, but obviously we would want it to be better. And the third point I wanted to raise goes back to Amanda's issue around the perpetrator programmes, which we did identify was a gap. One of the issues was around fixed term funding. I know that's not going to change, but clearly the need doesn't change when the funding runs out. So, you know, that did make it difficult to get strategically. But one of the issues that we found was that funding was tied often to a particular referring agency or a particular sort of level of need. Like I think one setting where we visited, I think it was a neighbouring authority. It was across West Yorkshire. That it was like there was funding for police referrals for medium level offenders, and if there weren't any, that meant it wasn't being used. But if they had perhaps taken referrals from social services, might have been able to use that properly, or if they were able to work the category. So sometimes the source of the funding driven how it could be used, and it wasn't really always where the need was. So perhaps if I could just sort of follow up, say particularly those two things. Will the funding we've got for the perpetrator programme meet the needs as it has been identified here? And a little bit of a concern, I said, about the issue around secondary referrals. Are we sure there's nobody who's being missed just because the sort of risks are different?
If I might respond to issue that was raised in respect of the secondary children and child sexual exploitation. As you probably know, we have a child exploitation team, which was previously known as child sexual exploitation team, and that team is located with the police at Halifax Police Station to ensure a robust response and combating all forms of exploitation. So that team has developed, following the Ofsted ILACS inspection in November, from child sexual exploitation team to cover all other forms of exploitation. And when we were talking about forms and changes and processes, actually, we have also streamlined the process within that team, and we have developed a risk assessment child exploitation form, which actually social workers and partner agencies actually fill in order to assess and grade the risk that the child is exposed to. Any children that are considered actually to be at risk of child exploitation, sexual exploitation, or any other forms of abuse actually would then be discussed on Mondays at multi-agency child exploitation meetings. And as I said, they would be graded in respect of risk. It would be like a traffic light system. Any children that are then considered to be at the higher end of medium risk and high risk would be then discussed at matrix meetings on the Fridays. Any referrals that are actually coming through in respect of child sexual exploitation would be dealt with actually by our children assessment team and child exploitation team. And what we have done with regards to both of those teams have undertaken regular thematic audits. For example, we have actually looked at the decision making at CAT, and it is telling us that actually their decision making is being consistently good. When we have looked actually within our audits in respect of child exploitation risk assessment, it was confirmed actually that assessment contained appropriate information which informed overall analysis and grading of risks. Now, what we do is have these regular thematic audits in order to reassure ourselves, actually, that we are doing what we are supposed to be doing, really. Any referrals that are coming from school are being screened by mass initially, and then the case is referred to appropriate services. Those children, the same thing would apply as well for secondary school children, and Leslie might be able to assist with this, is actually if they are not at school, a referral would be made to mass. Those discussions would be taking place and the children would be seen at the moment, most likely, unless there are serious concerns, by our early health workers, actually, who would go and assess situation. And at that point, they would come back and discussion would take place as to whether or not that child is considered to be at risk of any harm, whether or not we would need to open a single assessment, whether or not we would actually do have Section 47, or whether or not any out of children's services agencies are actually best placed to support these children and ensure that they attend schooling, that they are seen, and that they are not at risk of harm.
Are you reassured, Helen?
Yeah, well, thanks for that response. Yes, I did ask the other question about perpetrator programmes, so I don't know who's best to.
Julie, perhaps.
Yeah, I'll come in on that, Chair. Thank you. Yes, as I said, we had a discussion today about the perpetrator programmes, and I've just got some of the data up that I can share with you around that from the report. Yorkshire Children's Centre are the ones that had the short-term funding or the kind of time-limited funding from, I think, from the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office that we're checking whether that's continuing. From April to June, we haven't got any outcomes in terms of perpetrators being worked with over that period. It's saying that I think due to lockdown, they weren't able to continue the work. But from July to September, they had 2 men referred. You can see these are really small numbers. And 1 man completed the programme. It's a 17-week programme. And in October to December, 4 male clients were referred and 1 client has completed that programme. So you can see they're very small numbers there in terms of high risk. So we did ask Councillor River and members, the probation service, about what was happening, what were they delivering. They actually are also delivering two perpetrator programmes, but obviously this is for men who've been convicted, but those are in place and they describe what those were. And then I've also got the detail up of what's happening around the kind of the lower risk and the early intervention. And that is a project that's called the West Yorkshire Cautions and Relationship Abuse. And this is about getting in there early. It's being led by the Hampton Trust, who are working across other areas of the country. And this is for first time offenders, where they're kind of getting, making that contact with those men straight away, doing some face-to-face work. And they were doing that in the White Swan Hotel, actually in Halifax. So very local, kind of getting in there very quickly with the perpetrators that are being picked up and looking at those who've received a conditional caution. So I think we've probably got the lower end quite well covered. We've got the kind of work happening by probation. We need to check, and we've agreed today from the Domestic Abuse Board that we need to clarify with the PCC's office what's happening about those high risk offenders, and looking at what's available for everybody, whatever level, from the mapping work that we're doing, and then looking at the funding that's come down that we're going to allocate against the domestic abuse bill. And there is quite a strong national lobby, as I said earlier, around using that to make sure that perpetrators are getting the treatment that they need.
So, sorry, but just quickly come back. This will be wherever they were referred from, because I think when we've been visited the Yorkshire Children's Centre in Cutley, one of the barriers was because it was funded by the PCC. They could only accept referrals from a particular route.
Yes, they can accept referrals from certain agencies, but they can accept self-referrals. So if you've got somebody who's motivated in terms of change, they will be able to get on that programme. But you're right, it is limited in terms of the agencies that can refer.
But will this be the case in the monies that we're receiving, or will it be able to get them from wherever we identify the need?
what we will do is map exactly what's there. We'll look at where the gaps are. Clearly, if you're a perpetrator, whatever level you're at, we want to make sure it's easy for you to access the services. So we will look at that, Councillor Rivron, as part of that work.
Yeah.
Particularly given what you found in your last scrutiny review.
Yeah. Thank you.
Dr. Vickers, Helen. You still on mute?
Can you hear me now?
You good? Yep, good to go.
Yep. Okay. Sorry, I'm struggling a little bit with the phone. A couple of things. I'm probably going to go over things that other people have already said because my Wi-Fi keeps going off. Well, not Wi-Fi, but 4G. Anyway, the connection. So Mike Barnes said something about statistics. I completely agree with him. There's no point in displaying statistics unless it's comparative. Bradford could have referral levels of 10 and we could have them of 1,000, for example. If you're not showing them comparatively to other regions, then what does it actually mean? Also, I think it did show them. I didn't receive the tables, etc., until just now, and haven't really had a chance to read them. But I think it did show them year by year, which is important, obviously, to see if there's an increase or a decrease and why. So I just wanted to say that I agree with what he was saying. My other point is that obviously, I don't think anybody would deny that there's significant underfunding in all areas of social services, public services, the police, everything else, and everybody is struggling. I know personally from, well, not personally, but from contacts and work that I've been doing within Calderdale and Bradford, that staff have had to be cut recently, or staff that have been lost have not been replaced. I know that somebody mentioned earlier that because of the increased funding that we're now getting in Calderdale, there's the 450,000. I don't know if that relates to the extra 2 staff that are going to be employed because of the obvious increase in referral cases or domestic violence, etc., that's across the country. I just wonder how we define what vulnerable is. So vulnerable with regard to which children should be at school, vulnerable with regard to which cases, and I know that this has happened, we should hold on to with regard to children who are in vulnerable positions and are being looked at by social services, and which ones we should not, because they're not vulnerable enough. That's quite a big question, really, but it's certainly something that has been a problem recently, certainly in Calderdale, Bradford area. I know that there's been a few incidents where children have been harmed because their cases have been put to one side because of the lack of funding and the lack of staff. I know that everybody's doing an incredible amount of work, and I really respect this, and I know that everything's extremely hard, but I know that it's very difficult not to let things just get passed by because everybody's under such extreme pressure. So I just wondered how you define vulnerable, which is, I suppose, a crazy thing to ask, but yeah.
Well, thanks, Helen. I'm a bit disturbed. I'm a bit disturbed if you actually know of actual cases where harm has been done. I hope you report them to the correct authorities immediately.
I'm not talking personally
we've got
about
an hour into this.
Sorry, I wasn't talking personally about me. Sorry.
If you have knowledge of that sort of thing, you should be reporting it. Anyway.
No.
We've got an hour into this conversation and nobody's mentioned thresholds, which when I read this piece of paper, that's what I was going to talk about. So I don't know if Julie wants to answer Helen's questions about thresholds, really.
Can I just make a couple of comments, yes, about what Dr. Vickers has said, particularly in relation to the funding, and I know many of you on Children's Scrutiny will know this to be the case. You know, we have put a lot of investment and time, money, resources, social workers into children's social care, and we are very responsive with cross-party support, you know, where the need and demand increases. You know, we are incredibly blessed to have the support of all of you who will say immediately, we need more resources to meet that need. So Zell is very lucky, as he knows, to have one whole extra team in the children's assessment team after the inspection in 18, but also as demand was rising at the front door, we put 2 additional social workers in there. And just to confirm for Dr. Vickers, the 455,000 is money that's coming from central government for domestic abuse services to meet the needs of the new bill that are going to be placed on the local authority. So we are very lucky in Calderdale. You know, we are very well staffed. We don't rely a lot on agency staff, as you know. We try and keep on top of our recruitment. We try and get as much experience as we can when we're recruiting social workers, but we also take quite a number of new social workers and students every year and train them in systemic practice, etc. So, just to assure you on that, Dr. Vickers, there isn't a shortage of funding at all. Not, definitely not for the, for the social care service. I think in relation to vulnerable, that's laid out pretty clearly in legislation for us in the Children Act. Although it was written in 1989, it's still spot on in terms of children in need. And it describes lots of different categories there around who those children are. And it can be anything from children who are homeless to children with disabilities to children who've been abandoned. It's very, very clear on who those vulnerable children are and why. Things have become more sophisticated, as Zell is saying, with understanding different forms of exploitation for older children, hence the child exploitation team kind of expanding its remit over the years as well. But once it goes to Zell's team, the social workers have to do an assessment, and that assessment looks at every single need of that family. It looks at the children's needs specifically, but also the parents' capacity to meet those needs. And the vulnerability level is identified through that assessment, and every family that needs a social work service gets an assessment. As you've seen from Zell's report, it's a pretty timely assessment, but it will look at the vulnerability factors. We look at the strengths as well. We just don't concentrate on the vulnerable bits, because all families have strengths and they all have solutions to their own problems. And what we try and do is work on both, help them with reduce the vulnerability and risk, but also help them develop their strengths and resilience.
Happy, Helen?
Yes, thank you. Can I just say that when I said personally, I just meant through work contacts. It's not a personal experience of mine, but I am aware of situations that have happened in the last 6 months in Calderdale or Bradford, which have led to problems. So, yeah.
I hope Julie knows about it.
I have no idea, but I can't disclose any more over this chat, really. It's just other work that I've been doing. But I am aware. I'm aware of struggles, is what I'm trying to say, and I think nationwide, there is significant underfunding, and I do recognise that we are doing our absolute best. Or Calderdale, not me, and everybody that works for the team are doing their absolute best to meet the challenges that they're faced with. But it is very hard, and got complete respect for everyone that works within.
I can follow this up, Chair, with Dr. Vickers outside the meeting.
You don't mind, Amanda?
Am I okay, Councillor Rastrick, to actually raise answer to a first issue that was raised in respect of actually comparison with other local authority that Dr. Vickers mentioned?
Yeah, sure, go.
I don't know. I just wanted to clarify. We do receive something what's called Yorkshire and Humberside RIA reports, and these reports compare the rates of activity within Calderdale and with our statistical neighbours nationally. I maybe haven't made myself clear before. I do not have that document on me. However, we get it regularly. In respect of evidence that I do have on me is actually, I don't know if Julie has shared it, my apologies again to you, Julie, if you have, is actually in respect of our Section 47, all our Section 47s are completed within 5 working days, even though the current guidance allow for up to 15 days. 99.6% of our single assessments are completed within the recommended timescales of 45 days. Our data is also telling us that our referral rates are at their lowest since 2017, and this is suggesting actually that the early help pathway might be working as intended. These are still early days, but we will keep our eye on it. Our Section 47 inquiries are the lowest since 2018. We know that our timeliness is good. but we are also looking at the quality, we are looking at consistency, we undertake regular audits, and all these audits are telling us that decision made must are very timely and actually are more appropriate. And also any audits conducted within CAT and child exploitation team is telling us actually that we are definitely on the right path. So I just think maybe I haven't actually clarified it. I think you raised it, Councillor Rustic, initially in respect of actually comparison to other local authorities. And I don't know, we do receive that document, and if we are allowed to share it, I think it might be worth sharing those kind of information with yourself to provide some more clarity with regards to that matter.
Thanks, Al. I can imagine no reason why you wouldn't be allowed to share it. That's not quite the way scrutiny works. Amanda.
Thank you, Chair. It seems like a long time we were talking about this, but a few minutes ago we were talking about the Perpetrator Programme. And I just want to come back to what Julie was saying about there was 2 people referred between July and September. So one of the things that I was really surprised at when we looked at this is okay, some people might say that's not a lot of people, but say one perpetrator had 5 children and we now have to house 5 children in residential care at a rough guide of 3 to 6 grand a week. That could be like 20-25 grand a week we're talking about, and obviously the mental health risks and everything involved with removing children from the families. So I firmly believe that the Perpetrator Programme is something that we really, really need to put in place, and I'm thrilled to see that we've got this £455,000 to look at some of that work. That is brilliant news. Thank you.
Pleasure. We've been talking about this for long. I've just got 1 or 2 quick ones for whoever wants it to be. Let's keep it sharp. The actual graph that does show trends in years, the trends in referrals by years, I'm not sure whether it's showing me a good thing or a bad thing. Number of referrals, outcomes of referrals. Is it good that it's gone down to 26, or is it bad that it's gone down to 26?
I might be able to answer that one. The lower number of contacts that are coming through as referrals means actually that there will be less assessment being undertaken by children's services. What we have to be very easy as to whether or
not what the number means. No, sorry, Zell. I understand what the number means. I want to know if it's a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah, when I attended training day with the Leeds local authority, that would have been over a year now. Their rate of referrals were 40%. Our current rates of referrals are 26%. What I'm saying is, number in itself are not going to tell you much. The most important thing is actually to ensure that the threshold is being met. What we have is a threshold document actually, which is clearly stating under what remit the children would be actually assessed by children's services. The lower number is better than actually the higher number, which is showing a good gatekeeping at the front door services.
Well, I'm not going to argue with that point, but thresholds are it's come up twice now. It would be easy to manipulate that number by changing your thresholds or changing the interpretation of thresholds.
I can reassure you that if children actually meet the thresholds for our involvement, they will definitely, their needs and the family's needs will be assessed. There is absolutely no question about that. And that is one of the reasons.
I am confident about that. But again, I'll go back to the point. How can I express this succinctly? The proportion of contacts, so that actually, I suppose it is better if it's low, because you want lots of contacts. You want to know that everybody's awareness has been raised. We had the same discussion with the mental health people, the children mental health people, about how do you know the right number of referrals or contracts? How do you know the right number? You can't possibly know. But my guess is that higher should be better, because that's showing you've raised awareness of the people who are referring. Now, if you're saying that the 26% and Leeds are at 40%, that's interesting information. And their threshold, given that their thresholds are the same, why would that be?
Well, the thing from our point of view, it doesn't necessarily raise awareness, because anyone is allowed to make a contact to must. Is it actually a professional or a family member or child themselves or any voluntary organizations or any, they can make a referral to must. The most important thing is that we ensure that the right service is offered to the family at the right time, not for us to conduct and undertake more assessments. It is making sure actually that the family receives appropriate support at the right time. This is the most important thing, and this is how it should be viewed, rather just simply in numbers. Because if you are conducting still, as we do, a substantial number of assessments, and 27.1% of them are actually outcome as no further action or as a case closure, that seems to me that we still might be a bit higher than I would want them to be, actually, even at 26% of these contacts coming through as referrals to children's services. My question would be, given that we are actually having a social worker involved with the family without necessarily having the need actually for a social worker to be involved in the family, can be oppressive at times. And not all families will welcome us out actually to their home to actually come and do assessment. What we have to do is to have clear thresholds, to follow those thresholds, and to make sure that the right service, like in this case, for example, what has happened with the schools until actually the early pathway was actually introduced is that the social worker would have to actually go and visit the child without knowing as to whether or not the child who is not at school is actually at risk at anyhow. The child might be just ill or have many other different issues that mom has forgotten to call the school, or actually could be many other reasons that would not necessarily actually warrant our involvement whatsoever with those families. And those families would most of the time actually welcome family worker knocking on the door and checking how they are doing, rather than having a social worker.
Yeah, again, I think we're talking about two completely different things. The number of referrals. You're right to come at it from the aspect of the child first. That's absolutely right. But the number of referrals and then the percentage of referrals, that contacts that turn into a referral, it's quite an interesting number. I'm not sure that your wish for it to be lower is necessarily right either. As this question I asked right at the beginning, is this right? I'm going to leave that alone and just ponder it for a while. I'm not quite sure I've been reassured about that. I just have one more thing and then I'm finished. If we've got this spike, they're expecting this spike when schools go back, which is imminently. Are we expecting children looked after numbers to go up and child protection numbers to go up? Are we ready for that? Is that a natural consequence?
We do see usually a correlation between what comes in, as you know, from the very front door, from the assessment team, that flows through then to children in need and to child protection to looked after children. But we're seeing a slightly skewed picture at the moment. I think particularly at the looked after end, as I've told you before, the ability to see through some exit plans with children returning home to the parents, children who are going to be adopted, special guardianship. A lot of that work has slowed down because of the court capacity. It is starting to pick up. Rob has reported that we're getting a number of children who are leaving care in the last month because the courts have actually, they're putting more timetabling in, and we're able to catch up on some of that. So we are seeing a slightly skewed picture at the moment. So we've seen our numbers of looked after children go up to over 350, but they are slowly and surely coming down again. And I think Sal, they're at 341 or 343 this week. But we have seen a rise in the number of complex cases coming through, the number of children on child protection plans and children in need plans, but those are reducing as well at the moment. So I think we will see inevitably, with a rise in referrals, a rise in activity through the whole of children's social care activity. But because of the good quality work we do around permanency, about looking for good outcomes for children, is it safe for them to go home, looking at children who are coming onto plans, what do we need to make sure that those risks are addressed and the plans cease safely? If not, we're into public law outline and care proceedings. I think the system's work is working and dealing with the volume as it's coming through. But I would say the numbers of children in need and child protection are manageable at the moment. The numbers of children in care have remained a bit higher, but are actually starting to reduce as well, Councillor Oastrick.
Yeah. Finally, this is a really positive report, I would say, apart from the issues around data, which are a little bit annoying. But how are we going to get even better? How are we going to improve where we are now? We're not sitting all out. That's not the way we work, is it?
We have never stopped a single day or a single week, actually, without trying to make improvements. Julie knows me well by now. I'm never happy with whatever we achieve. And I can reassure you that we will actually continue to actually make further improvements. And what we do is, from each peer review, from each front door health check that we conduct or that have been conducted to the local authority, from each discussion with every single professional or family member that we are dealing with, actually, we learn. Even those, we learn a lot even from those local authorities who are on improvement journey. And I always try to pick out a brick that is a good brick to start actually building a house on, really, and carry on rather than look at negatives. What to me is encouraging, actually, to where we are today as to where we were, let's say, for example, 2 years ago. Everybody who is actually doing any actually audits, anyone who is actually looking at what we do is coming back with a positive feedback. What has happened in, I think, 2015, it was before my time, MAST was viewed as a shiny beacon for this local authority. Unfortunately, MAST haven't moved with times between 2015 and 2018. And this is why when the Ofsted visited in November 2018, they have actually deemed MAST to require improvements. All those in children's services, you are not allowed to stay still for a day. And what we do is actually learn from one another, learn from other local authorities, and actually move things forward. And I can assure you that we are continuing to do so.
Okay, thank you. Little note, Helen and Adam, we don't really have chats off the chat screen in this meeting. We're going to move on. Thank you, Zell. I think sometime in the future, I'm going to want to look at the audit report for. We don't seem to have had a look at it for a long time. I'd like to see what the audit of the audits looks like, but that can be for another day, Julie. But now it's back to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, Zal, if Zal could be released, you can go now, Zal. Thank you. We're going to move on to the education update. Thanks very much. Thanks, Zell. Thanks for coming this evening.
Thank you, bye.
Yeah, we're going to move on to the schools update. Clearly, we're in half term, so all of our schools are getting a very well-deserved break. But thanks very much to Leslie for joining us this evening, and Ben Lehman's here as well, consultant in public health, to give you an update. I'll hand over to Leslie, I think, to start.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair and Julie. Yeah, as Julie said, it's half term at the moment, and interestingly, I did have cause to ring a number of schools yesterday to look at the arrangements for polling stations, and over half of the heads I spoke to were actually in school during half term, even though they had taken that well-deserved break. The schools and our early year settings have been working really hard since we moved to restricted attendance for schools. Our early year settings have stayed open, but nationally we're seeing that early year settings attendance is below 50% at those, and that's what we're seeing. All our early year settings and schools have been invited to take part in our local testing arrangements or part of the national mass testing programme, and there's been a really high take up of that Ben may touch on. That's been a really key factor as one of the measures in us helping to stop the transmission, and it has highlighted a number of positive cases that have then enabled us to prevent that being spread any wider. So it's been a really important aspect of some of the measures that are taking place in schools and early year settings. We're monitoring attendance very, very closely. Our figures in Calderdale are slightly higher than the national figures. The figures that I'm going to share with you now are from the 11th of February for schools, which was the day before we closed, which was the last data collection that we've currently got. And the latest national figures are from the published data on the 21st of January. So there's a slight difference in the dates there. On the 11th of February, we had 100% of schools reported as open, but we do know that one didn't complete that return because they were actually closed for operational reasons. They'd had a number of cases that were identified through the lateral flow testing, and for operational reasons then they did close for the rest of that week before half term. But generally we've had 100% of our schools open. Our attendance overall was at 19%. The latest national figure was 14%, so we're above that. Of our children who have got education, health and care plans, and those are some of the children who are classed as vulnerable in the DFE, the Department for Education criteria for vulnerable children. 40% of our children with EHCPs were attending, compared to 35% nationally. And 50% of our children with social workers were in attendance compared to 41% nationally. And I think that's a really important point to stress, that we've just obviously been having lengthy discussions about vulnerable children. Most of our vulnerable children
just losing Leslie a little bit there, aren't we? We're
children are in school at some point, some of their therapists. Sorry, are you losing me?
Yeah, we're just losing you a little bit. It's kind of freezing, and then we're hearing a lot of the dialogue together. So,
okay, I'll do my best. I am tethered to my phone rather than. I'll do my best. Do indicate if it gets bad, and
all right, Leslie.
I'll come out and back in again. So our attendance is stronger than national, and that really is testament to our schools for all the hard work they're doing in trying to make sure they can open safely for those children who do need to be in school the most. We do have 75% of critical worker children in attendance, and that compares to 71% nationally. We've touched on the fact that regular welfare checks, a number of times a week, are being made on those vulnerable children who are not in school. There's a difference between our primary and secondary attendance, which is in line with national. Shall I try to come out and back in again?
No, it's okay. We can hear you at the minute. It's just Councillor
Okay.
Raystrick talking about
Okay.
getting a cuppa, I think. You carry on, Leslie.
That's okay. So our secondary schools, there's a variation across them from 5% to 16%, but it generally is between sort of 5 and 10%. And nationally, it's 5% for secondary schools. And in Calderdale, 47% of our primary school children are in attendance, compared to 21% nationally. So quite a big difference there. And our special schools are at around between 25% and 50%. That varies depending on those part-time timetables, but nationally it's about 30%. So you can see that Calderdale schools are doing a fantastic job in making sure they're having as many children in school safely as possible. There's been a lot of work to support children with free school meals. So those who are in attendance are still getting their free school meals. Those who aren't are getting provision, the majority through the National Voucher Scheme, but some through provision from schools as well. And provision was made for families on free school meals during February half term through the winter grant scheme that made a direct payment to families in December. But within Calderdale, there's been a further lockdown payment made in recognition of the increased pressures, financial pressures on families, particularly during this really cold spell of the year. And given that families are now dealing with, most families are dealing with children at home 24/7. So an additional payment of £15 per child was made to families on low income. So that's not just free school meals, but that also includes our early years families who are on low income as well, which is really important. We're working at the moment on the holiday activities and food programme, which is the government's response for provision for free school meals during school holiday periods for the rest of the year. It covers some of those holiday periods, but not all. And it covers activities, including things about nutritional education and physical activities, as well as the provision of food. But we've got a working party that's working on that programme, and that includes head teacher representatives, our customer services team, the voluntary sector, including the community foundation, and the people who've been working on our Never Hungry Again campaign. So that's a wide-ranging group that are working to make sure we can really provide for our families as best as possible. We have got a meeting next week of the Never Hungry Again campaign to just have a look at what further provision we can put in place to really try and help some of the financial hardship that families are facing. I attended a webinar with the Children's Commissioner today, and that focused very heavily on the impact of the financial pressures and how far-reaching those are. So that's something that we're working really hard on within Calderdale. You'll be aware that we've got remote learning going on for the vast majority of children, and one of the issues around that was around the provision of devices. I'm delighted to say that we've had 1,072 devices delivered from the Department for Education, but only 38 dongles to provide internet access. Our really effective local fundraising campaign has raised at the moment around £53,000 to provide further devices, and we've got 80 laptops that have now been delivered and are ready to go out to children. They're ready now. They've all been checked off this week. There was a delay in them arriving because of the bad weather, but they're all here now and ready to go to schools. And we're providing about 215 dongles to provide internet access, along with those 80 laptops in the first round. And we've got at least the same again to come. So those will be out with children as fast as possible. There's an awful lot of work going on as well around emotional and mental health, emotional well-being and mental health support. And we've got the first mental health teams in schools are now out in our schools. We've got them in a number of secondary and primary schools, and we're working on a second bid for a further round of that. And that provides emotional and mental health educational workers working directly in those schools, which is a really key piece of work. It's recently been Children's Mental Health Week, and there's been a real push on the support that's available for children, particularly through our Open Minds services, and that includes COOTH. COOTH have launched a recent social media campaign and are running a range of activities for schools and for children to support in that wider approach to mental health. There's still an awful lot of work going on to continue school improvement work. That hasn't stopped throughout this period. Our school effectiveness service is working really closely with schools, and particularly looking at how we can really identify the gaps that children have, both coming back to the wider opening of school, but that have widened throughout the whole period of the pandemic, even when schools were fully open. And so there's an incredible amount of work going on to support that. A lot of that work is through the Education Endowment Foundation. They're leading on much of the work, and they're providing a lot of resources for schools for remote learning, but also for the catch-up programme and and they're leading on the National Tutoring Programme. So there's a significant investment in that work that's going on, and we're working with schools locally to look at how we can support them in their approach, and work with local partners through our teaching school alliances, the English and the maths hubs, and our local universities, to make sure that we're really tapping into all the expertise that's available. We're doing an awful lot of work on what's been called the recovery curriculum. So how we can adapt the curriculum to address those gaps that have been identified, but also to make sure that we've got a breadth of support, not just in the recovery for academic subjects, but very much around the social development of children, particularly again for our early years children who've missed out on a lot of their really crucial social development, and around their speech, language and communication needs. So there's access to all schools to some of the Early Education Foundation early years programmes to support with some of that. Our schools want children back. They want them back as quickly as possible, but clearly that has to be done safely. And as we've heard at previous scrutiny meetings, the support of our public health team has been invaluable to our schools in being able to operate safely. And now we're working with our Safe Education group to make sure that we're planning really carefully for the wider opening of schools. So we've got a working party that's started to look at how we can do that. We don't as yet have any national guidance about what the wider opening will look like or what the expectations will be. We've got a meeting tomorrow with the Department for Education where we'll be talking to them about our plans, but we won't hear until next week when the Prime Minister outlines the roadmap and we hear more detail of the wider opening for schools, which will be from the 8th of March at the earliest. But our schools do want their children back as quickly as possible. So the working group is looking at all the measures that can be in place, looking at the risk assessments with what we know about the latest variant and the increased rate of transmission, with all the measures that schools have in place and how we can make sure those are really robust. And of them working with that national guidance when it comes out to make sure that we're as well prepared as possible, and schools have got every opportunity to make sure they have all their control measures in place and parents are well informed. So part of that work is around communication with parents and families so that they know what's happening and they can plan for their arrangements, but also communication with school staff so that we can allay concerns from them, that all appropriate measures are in place and system controls are in place, and that they understand how the risks are being managed for them, and that they can be confident in making sure that we get our children back to school as quickly as possible. I think I'll pause there if there are any questions on anything I've raised so far.
All right, thank you, Leslie. I would comment that I think we're coping with this situation now, but the situation in the future is going to be the one we're going to really have to find out what's going on about. So Sarah is first.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, massive thanks again to all sort of staff within the council and in schools, to all the work that they're doing. keeping our young people, children and young people, educated as far as they possibly can under the very difficult circumstances. And I know I think we thank them every month, but they, you know, those thanks are really well deserved and needed. So I'm aware that special school staff were being prioritised. I asked the question in council last week. Was it last week? I don't know. Time has got into sort of a big amorphous lump. But recently asked the question about special school staff getting the vaccination, because often they are more akin to, you know, their sort of role is quite sort of care related for children and young people, especially who've got sort of quite severe additional needs or need that sort of physical contact. But how about is there sort of like a view or a plan to be able to bring forward the vaccination for other school staff and not just special school, and to prioritise them? I don't know how much we can do that on a local level, or if that has to be a national initiative. But it's just, you know, obviously school staff are vulnerable, especially in primary schools, because of maybe the closer contacts, but also in secondary schools because of the greater numbers and the sort of changing, you know, numbers of the children that each teacher will see. So that's my question.
I think that's one for you, Ben. You can give the you can give the JCVI answer.
Yeah. So I think. Thanks for the question, Councillor. I think you're absolutely right. This is a nationally run programme, and it's run by the NHS. We clearly will give public health advice along the way to the implementation of that programme locally, but we are constrained within the guidance of the JCVI, the Joint Committee for Vaccination and Immunisation, as Councillor Oestrich says, and it's really important just to re-emphasise, I think I've said it before, the purpose of the vaccination programme and the way the vaccines have been designed is to reduce the impact of COVID on those who are most likely to get really ill and end up in hospital or die. And that's why it's being really targeted at initially, you know, the more elderly age range and those who are clinically extremely vulnerable, and now moving into those who are slightly less old and slightly less clinically extremely vulnerable, but still have clinical vulnerability. There's 9 stages to this. We're down to stage 6 at the moment, and in each stage brings more and more people in. Each stage is bigger. Once we've done all 9, then it gets rolled out to the wider population. And I think it's at that point where we'll start having the conversations about which professionals should be prioritised within the general population. But I don't think there's any intention at the moment, because there's no evidence to suggest that teachers are more likely to get seriously ill or die if they catch COVID, even though they may be more exposed to it in the school environment. That there'd be any push to you know, get them immunised over and above someone who has got clinical illness that makes them more susceptible if they did catch COVID.
I thank you, Ben. I do understand that, and the only reason I was laughing is that we were having a conversation before the meeting started where a number of us were sort of sharing the fact that we're down for or have had vaccinations, despite not necessarily feeling like we're particularly old or vulnerable.
That's because you're slightly less old, Sarah.
I'm slightly less old.
To quote Ben.
To quote Ben, I am slightly less old. However, and I suppose that I totally understand what you're saying, and I do get that. I suppose the only thing that I would question, and I know that, you know, that it's a national programme, I do understand, but if there is any leeway, it's just that obviously if you've got schools open again and then you have got teachers who end up becoming ill with COVID, that can close a bubble, but also or be you know, and I know that there's been sort of reported shortages of staff within schools because of teachers having COVID, which means that actually classes maybe or have to you know, not just be sent home because of the contact, but also because there just aren't enough teachers then to teach, which then has an impact if we, you know, impact on on other people and their jobs, and etc. So I get what you're saying. I do get what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying. But I just think that there is, like with teaching staff, it is slightly different to just other professions, because actually you're looking after a whole cohort of a whole group of people.
I understand what you're saying, Sarah, but they aren't going to change it. Not in my
but we can.
In the immediate future. I mean, you can make an argument for bus drivers or M&S food staff, or
I know, I understand that. Can we not?
Exception.
Do we not have some sort of, like, say, over how the reserve list, though, and reserve vaccines are used? Is that not?
There isn't really reserve list. If there's vaccine that needs using up, we look at who's on the priority list and get them in quickly.
Okay.
As opposed to adding people in. I think Councillor Racic's right. We're not going to be able to change the national process.
No, fair enough.
I think what is really important to say is that having the vaccine doesn't mean you can't catch COVID, and it doesn't mean you can't give it to other people. So, if we thought that it completely ruled out transmission, then we'd probably be having a different discussion, and we would be looking at the people who are more likely to pass it on to others. But that's not the case. And we know in Calderdale people have been vaccinated and still caught COVID. The other thing is, just in terms of occupations, there are other occupations where you're far more likely actually to catch COVID and die than if you're a teacher. And we've seen that for some of the national data, and that's some of the debate we'll be having about that balance between professionals who have lots of contact with others, and individuals who work in roles that exposes them much more to the virus. So if you look at the data, for example, security guards are much more likely to die of COVID than teachers are, so you could say actually they'd be more justified because it would protect them from dying.
Fortunately, they don't have a powerful lobby group like the NUT, so
that's true.
Thank you, Ben.
Let's move on. Colin.
Thank you, Chair. It's good to hear that crates of devices are arriving now for use of school children, although I'm not sure that there's been the recognition that it's not just about having the device, but being able to connect it to internet services. And we see each meeting we have the problems of connectivity amongst members and officers that exist. So I'm sure the same is true with school children. But how close are we to closing the gap between supply and demand? Because that's the crucial thing. How many kids are still going to be lacking the means to access remote learning? And then what are the terms on which they're allocated, these devices? Are they allowed to retain them, or are they constantly having to recycle them? Because we all know how important it is to actually get familiar with the devices that you're using. And if you're constantly having to chop and change them, you're not going to get the best out of them. Thanks.
One for you, Leslie, I think.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Hutchinson. I think in terms of connectivity, we're really acutely aware of that issue. The Department for Education have given further guidance around data providers expanding their free provision, but also where that's not possible, then they've provided some dongles to enable that. But in Calderdale, I think we've got in the region of around 40 dongles allocated across all our schools. So we prioritise that with our local campaign, and because obviously one dongle can enable access for a family rather than for one child. So we've provided about 225 dongles in the first tranche, far more than the number of devices that we're giving, because we recognise that connectivity is really key, and that with children who perhaps had a device who weren't able to connect. I don't have the accurate figures as it will stand on Monday when those devices are out with children, for the number still waiting, but we will have that, and we've got a working party that are monitoring that all the time. What we found was that initially we had about 400 children identified as still having a gap. But a number of those have been provided for through increased supplies from the Department for Education, and that's changing all the time. So we'll do another audit at the start of next week, but that number will clearly have come down with further devices from the department and with those 80 laptops that are going out locally, and then further supplies that we've got on order now to be delivered. We've had a fantastic response to our local offer. The Community Foundation have done an amazing job. The Valley Learning Partnership had a crowdfunding page. We've had donations from the National Education Union and from Locala. So, you know, a really sort of combined effort from people and making a difference. But I think one of the other issues we're facing is that it's not just about connectivity and the device. It's also about the support that the family can provide, and that varies so much. We recognise that the divide for our disadvantaged children has widened significantly. We don't know the full extent of that until we have everybody back in school, but that's a national issue and something that we're working really closely with partners on. So I mentioned the Education Endowment Foundation earlier. We're working with them locally to try and make sure that we can do some combined work to support our schools, make sure we're getting the very best provision for our children to catch up where those gaps are. That's a long process. That's not something that's going to be fixed with some summer schools over the summer holidays. We're looking at years now of work to make sure we're really addressing the needs of our children and closing that disadvantage gap that we had been starting to close, but we recognise that we'll have widened again.
Thank you, Leslie.
Sorry, do they retain those devices?
Yes, they are actually on loan to families, but they are on long-term loan. And I think the reason we've had a big push recently is that there were a limited number of devices available that were on short-term loan to families when they were at home through being a bubble that was closed or through having to self-isolate. Clearly now we've got large numbers of children who are at home, so that's why there's been a rapid increase in the number of devices allocated. From the ones that we've raised locally, those are given to the schools. Those are gifted. They're not coming back to the local authority. Those are gifted to the schools for the schools to use in the best way possible. So where that works, those can stay with the children on loan. They do need to come back at some point, but on long-term loan where that's possible, so that children can, as you say, be used to using those devices and used to the way that they work. And then it will be for the schools to best use those devices once we get more children back into school, so that they can maximise their use within school and children have access to digital learning as they normally would through their curriculum.
Thank you, Leslie. The next time we have a sort of update as to Colin's question about supply and demand, it'd be nice if you could give us although Mike's not clean on snapshots, if we could just have a snapshot of where we are, how many are still waiting, that'd be good. Okay, thank you. Dr. Vickers, Helen. You've got to unmute, Helen.
Am I unmuted?
No, you are now.
Right, you can hear me. Can
Yes.
you hear me? Yeah, cool.
Yes.
Right, well, yeah, a couple of questions. One is relating back to why I chatted with Adam, which I probably shouldn't have done, but I am aware, and I'm assuming everyone else is, that COVID regionally, well, in Calderdale is significantly higher than regional and national averages presently. And nationally, COVID is, well, certainly the number of people in hospital with COVID, or the number of cases of COVID, is significantly higher than it was in the spike in April last year. So I kind of think, well, is return to school on the 8th of March really realistic? If you look at a report recently in the TES, it suggests that the R, which currently has a baseline of 0.8. This is probably, I'm aiming at Ben with this potentially, but currently the R value for the UK is 0.8. That's a baseline. The prediction is that on the children returning back to school, it will rise to between 1 and 1.5. So, you know, obviously that means anything greater than 1 infection is spreading. Is that really a sensible thing to do? Taking that into account with regard to what Sarah was saying earlier, I don't think we got a clear answer. Have all special school staff now been offered the vaccination? I know that there is a programme that the government have organised in which, you know, certain people get the vaccination at certain times, but we're certainly a long way behind a number of other counties and boroughs and councils. So Bradford had offered this vaccination several weeks ago to all special school staff. And also, when will nurseries and early years settings be offered it? And there are a number of other things that, for example, Bradford is doing, and I'm suggesting Bradford because I know that's alongside us, such as introducing ventilation systems within schools, anticipating the return of children to school, which will decrease the risk of viral spread. I just wondered what everybody thinks about everything I've just said. Sorry, there's a lot there, but yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Right.
First of all,
hang on a second, Ben. Hang on. Well, first of all, when the schools go back is not a question for the local authority. It's not a question that we can answer. But the rest of that, off you go, Ben.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So first of all special school staff have been offered vaccination, and so we're in the same position as other local authorities in the local area, and there are other local authorities in the country who haven't offered that. Everyone has moved at different pace on it, and it's down to local situation particularly in terms of uptake of vaccination in those people who most need it, care home residents, the over 80s and the clinically extremely vulnerable. So they have been offered that now. The discussion about early years staff is the same discussions we've just had actually about education staff generally. Everyone will get a vaccination and they'll all get them in turn. And those who fall into one of the groups that currently meet the stage we're at for vaccination will receive them, but to general population discussion, the same as we have with education staff, there's nothing more to say on that really, I don't think. Right. And again, national programme. As to in terms of the safe reopening of schools, I think there's clearly a risk to any opening up of society at the moment. It's absolutely right that schools should be the first thing to open, and actually, or open wider, I suppose would be the correct terminology for that. Alongside that, it's absolutely correct that we do everything we can to make sure that's as safe an environment as possible. We haven't got any guidance nationally. That hasn't stopped us in the past issuing local guidance to make the setting as safe as possible, and we've done that through the lockdown period as well. And that has included how we make best use of the space we've got, and it has included advice around ventilation, and that's one of the key things we would wish to keep pushing, particularly in the context of the new variant of COVID, which, as you know, spreads much more easily than the old variant. So the group that Leslie mentioned earlier about the safer, the subgroup of the safer education working group, which is looking at what the wider opening of schools, is considering all of that, and public health are part of those discussions along with school heads, and we'll continue to do everything we can to make education as safe as possible in the context of COVID going forward, when we do have a bit more information about constraints that we may be working under. I don't think we should necessarily assume at this point, even if we get an announcement that schools are reopening on the 8th of March, that means that they'll be going back to normal at that point, and then there'll be a whole load of guidance that comes out that we'll need to look at in that context when it comes out.
Well, we've already seen what Scotland does and what Nicola does, Boris does 2 weeks later. Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to go back to the computers. I know we're sort of talking. Is this just the schools maintained by Calderdale Council, or does it include all our academies as well?
It includes all academies as well. So the 1,072 devices are actually to maintain schools, but academies have had their allocation as well. And the local fundraising one has gone to all schools and academies that need them.
Yeah, but for your figures, do you know how many have actually been distributed in the academy schools as well? Because they're a large proportion of our schools now.
Yes, I haven't got the exact figures here. I'll report them to the next meeting when we do the audit next week. We're waiting for the latest update, but they're all along similar lines to the maintained schools. So where schools have requested them, they've had their allocation, and schools and academies have been able to request additional devices for specific reasons, and those have been coming through as well. So the academies, as far as I'm aware, are no different to the maintained schools, that they're getting their allocation through. The allocation is based on a number of factors. It's including the levels of disadvantage in the school or academy, and the level of devices that the school and academy already have. So it takes into account a range of factors to make sure that they get as many as possible.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Leslie, I think when I asked for a snapshot of the supply and demand figures for computers, I wasn't thinking of waiting until the next meeting. I was thinking of would it get it next Tuesday after you've done it on the Monday.
Yeah, absolutely. We can get that to you.
I think that's it, members. Anybody else want to comment? I just want to say that I think we've had a lively discussion this evening. Perhaps not as lively as the last meeting, but Stephen?
Yeah, I'd just like to make another quick question regarding the social carers that we have. Are they still allowed to sort of meet in their pods? Because I think that's a major point of the systemic practice, that they can meet and discuss the cases and keep each other informed about the things. So is that still the case, Julie? Because I know at one stage it wasn't, but you were going to look into it, and I'm quite sure you have done. But I haven't asked whether it's all been implemented now, and all the areas are covered by that. Thanks.
Yes, it is, Councillor Baines. I'm pleased to let you know, because we've got the orange box, as you know, it's got significant space into it. The big room downstairs, you know, we do the training, a lot of the events has been split into two. It's completely socially distanced. You come into the room, you sanitize your hands, you sit in desks that are 2 meters apart from each other. The practice manager's there with the social workers, able to have a pod reflect every week. So we're using it morning and afternoon, but we're using it across the teams, including the family intervention team as well. So it's working really well and very safely. So yeah, there's a kind of in terms of the entrance and the exits and things being managed very well there. So yes, it is there. And I've got to say the social workers are very appreciative of the fact they can come together and see each other and get support. And you actually are having the social workers at your next meeting in March. A number of social workers are coming to talk to you directly about, you know, how it has been for them working through COVID. So you'll be able to speak to them directly as well, but they are meeting in their pod reflex.
Thank you, Stephen. We'll move on to the work programme, members, if we're all happy. Although I see Ben's turned his video off, and I was going to say that we've said thank you to the NHS, we've said thank you to teachers, we've said thank you to social workers tonight, and I felt over the last couple of meetings that we've not really given public health enough credit. I think they've done an absolutely fantastic job, and maybe they operate a little bit below the radar, and maybe that's a little bit unfair on them. Although not to say you couldn't do with a haircut, Ben, but couldn't we all?
Thank you, Chair. It's appreciated.
No problem. Credit where credit's due. Item 6. Is it? I think work programme.
Sorry, Chair, can I just go back on a point? Some of us don't need a haircut.
You're not talking about me. Obviously not, no. Okay, don't forget we're on YouTube. Let's keep it serious. We don't want any handful things here. Lauren, work programme.
Yeah, just to say that our next meeting, we've got some schools data, and members will be aware that obviously that won't be the comprehensive report that we usually have, but Leslie has advised that there'll be some of the phonics data to come. So that's on the agenda, and also the fostering recruitment strategy is on. If there's anything else that members want to add or change, more than welcome to either let us know now or drop us an email and we can build that in. It will be our last meeting of the municipal year as well.
Well, it's the last scheduled meeting. We're also having some social workers come and talk to us. I think there might be some disquiet about that, but I'm really looking forward to it. I don't think, yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I'd like to see where I think we've done things right and where we think we might do things better. From the horse's mouth, so to speak. I'm watching Julie's face, but my video is not good enough. So, right, okay, members. Good night, everyone.
Thanks very much, members. Thank you, Chair.
Good night, Chair.
Good evening.
Chair.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.